Welcome to the notes about the medieval church. This will cover information found in Chapter 13, Section 3. The medieval church hierarchy had the Pope at the top of the Catholic Church. The Pope was the most powerful person in the church hierarchy. Beneath the Pope, you have a series of cardinals who served as advisors to the Pope. They were called cardinals because they traditionally wore a red outfit. Below the cardinals, you have the archbishops. The archbishops had authority over the bishops in other smaller dioceses. Below that, you had bishops. Bishops were church officials who managed a diocese, administered holy orders, appointed priests, and managed church property. At the bottom of the medieval church hierarchy, you have parish priests. Parish priests were in charge of church services, supported religious instruction, and administered 5 of the 7 sacraments. Each person in this church hierarchy reported to a person that was higher. The Pope is the highest person within the church hierarchy, and he governs everybody within the church. Popes are chosen from the series of cardinals. Okay? And each major city within Europe at this point in time had a cardinal. And smaller cities had archbishops, and smaller cities had bishops, and local towns had parish priests. Life in the monastery. The monastery was where monks lived, and monks were people that were studying religion. And they were men that had dedicated their life to the support of the Catholic Church. Monasteries were separate from the rest of the medieval community. Monks oftentimes lived isolated lives, and very few left the monastery once they joined. So once you were in, you were in. However, we have a few notable monks who did leave the monastery and went on to do great things, such as St. Patrick and St. Augustine. However, when monks lived in the monastery, they were guided by a set of rules. These rules were called the Benedictine rule. A monk by the name of Benedict founded the monasteries and came up with these sets of rules. That's why we call them the Benedictine rule. And this is a guiding principle by which all monks strive to live by. And they include a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So monks vowed to dedicate themselves to the study of religion and to not want materialistic things outside of their religious duties. A day in the life of a monk was where monks tended to the basic services of the community. They oftentimes tended to the sick, so anybody that was sick or ill, monks would kind of take in and they would help take care of them, so they served as kind of like a quasi-hospital. They gave alms to the poor, gave charity to the poor. They oftentimes would help support and feed and house and clothe people that couldn't afford those basic needs. They set up schools, so they were in charge of educating the local village children. And when I say children, I am talking about young boys who could afford an education. And then they provided lodging to pilgrims, or they provided a place to stay for people that were traveling from place to place. Monks were also in charge of preserving ancient works. So they took text from ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and they would transcribe or copy those texts into more modern sets of work and in different languages as well. Okay. And then when we look at the specific day in the life of a monk, their day is broken down into lots of different pieces. Okay, roughly 7 hours of their day was spent either attending church or in prayer. 3 hours was spent working, whether it was with the community, education, things like that. Then they went back to church for 2 more hours. Okay? Then they had 1 hour to eat, another hour to do some sort of work, 3 more hours of church or prayer, and then 7 hours of sleeping. Okay? So altogether, within a monk's typical day, they have roughly 12 hours of their day is comprised of attending church services or reflecting in prayer. So half of their day is dedicated solely to their religious studies. Church in medieval life. The political role of churches in the medieval world were very important. Churches held religious and political power. There was no separation of church and state at this point. Instead, a lot of times, kings and queens, landowners and lords looked to the church to be an advisor, kind of their right-hand person. And a lot of times, their rules and their policies were dictated or governed by what the church said. So, in a way, the church was the most powerful institution throughout all of Europe. It had control over all of the different monarchs who were in charge of the smaller countries. Within the church itself, there's a set of laws and rules and regulations that govern how the church exists. And this is called canon law. So, this is the church's own laws and court systems. So, within canon law, there were certain things that countries or monarchs or kings and queens could and could not do. And then if they broke those laws and rules and regulations, they could be tried by the church. The church also had the ability or the power to tax the people. Okay? By the 1200s, the church was the wealthiest institution in Europe. Okay? The medieval church was raking in more money via taxes than kings and queens were taking in their own countries. This was because, like I said, the church was the most powerful institution. It had control over all aspects of people's lives, including kings and queens. The social role of the medieval church and life was that family was a sacred institution. Divorce was not allowed in the medieval church. And the church clergy or the local parish priests were responsible for taking care of the people within the village or the town. And the clergy and the priests were responsible for implementing the 7 sacraments or the 7 different aspects of one's religious life. So the first sacrament was baptism. And this was when babies were dedicated to be raised within the medieval church. Okay. The second sacrament is confirmation, okay, or the Eucharist. Then you have marriage, which is the next sacrament. Then you have reconciliation, last rites, and ordination. Okay. Again, these 7 sacraments were aspects of one's daily life. They were kind of a religious walkthrough or a religious path that each person within a town or village would take to secure their place within the medieval church. It was their way to kind of save their soul and protect themselves against any evil doings. Okay. So the medieval Christians also believed in salvation and damnation. Okay, so in order for one to be saved and to reach everlasting life, aka go to heaven and be saved from their sins, they had to follow the medieval church and practice the 7 sacraments. They had to conduct good deeds and they had to live a moral life. Basically, they had to be a good person and surrender to God. The flip side of that is if people did not do these things, they were destined for eternal damnation. Right? In other words, they would go to hell. And this was the result that the medieval church proclaimed of sinful activities, and it was the work of the devil or fire demons. Okay, so this whole idea of salvation versus damnation was really important in guiding the lives of people within the medieval church. So church officials would oftentimes hold this threat of damnation over people's head if they conducted something wrong or if they committed a sin, right? So it created this fear amongst people to sin or to do bad things because they were fearful of this idea of eternal damnation. Okay, so this is just some example of the works that medieval monks had put together. So I said a lot of their day was either spent in church or prayer or working. Part of their work was to scribe or to write out ancient works, but then also to work on translations of the Bible. So you can see that their work is very ornate and intricate in detail and use a lot of images and color. Okay, and then here's where our notes are going to stop. You have an assignment that is called the Medieval Church Assignment. For this assignment, you are going to use Chapter 13, Section 3 and these notes to make a pic collage advertising what life would be like in a monastery. Okay, so I want you to use kind of like these examples. So these are examples of flyers or posters that monks would create that are advertising something. Okay. And then also on page 301 in your textbook. And this again is about what life was like in a monastery. Okay, who are influential or famous people, who's a spokesperson. Your flyer must include a catchy slogan or motto, relevant information about the topic. You should make it visually pleasing, and think about ads that you see today. Okay.